Welcome to Edinburgh. Welcome here. So let's talk a little bit about Exiled. Now that film is perhaps the third film in a loose trilogy with Election, Election 2, and then Exiled. And it's set in Macau. And I wonder whether you want to start by talking about your approach to shooting films around the kind of the gangster environment of Hong Kong and Macau. What your interest in that is?
我都冇咩特別嗰個想法去關於呢個 Excel 當時拍嘅創作意念係冇嘅。
So I had no special interest in this area before we made Exiled.
因為拍完黑社會 Excel 拍完 Election 1、2集之後咧，我其實都好攰，因為好太多資料，變到大個人好攰。
So after we filmed Election 1 and 2, I was actually very tired. There's too much information, too much to process, so I was personally quite tired.
所以就諗住去澳門避避。
Thought I would go to Macau to escape.
去澳門避避唔做嘢又唔得喎，咁就拍部戲嚟咁樣。
So I couldn't justify going to Macau for an escape without working, so we thought let's make a film.
咁拍咩嘢咧？咁咪 Exiled 咯。
What should we make? Let's make Exiled.
And how, you know, Macau and Hong Kong have a similar kind of relationship to mainland China. Was this quite an interesting, and it's set in a very specific period, 1980, 1998. And do you see that Macau and Hong Kong are quite similar or different? Or?
香港同澳門其實都係殖民地嚟嘅。我覺得係
殖民地。
殖民地就係由英國統治，由葡萄牙統治嘅。咁我覺得佢哋其實好多背景係差唔多嘅。
So with Hong Kong and Macau both being colonial territories, I think their backgrounds are very similar.
因為統治管理佢哋兩個地方嘅都係外國人，裏邊住嘅人咧，真正嘅居民都係中國人。
So they're both governed by foreigners, by foreign countries, but the people living in it, the population are Chinese people.
咁因為香港嗰個地理環境或者香港嘅人口啊各方面係比較多，咁亦都唔係擦英國人鞋嘅，即係都係英國人管治嘅方法唔同，所以香港就比澳門繁榮嘅。
So even though Hong Kong has a very large population, it's thanks to the UK's government that Hong Kong has become more successful and has better living standards than Macau, I would say.
咁澳門真正 support 成澳門嘅都係賭場。
So Macau's economy is actually supported heavily by casinos and gambling.
其實入邊啲人都係中國人，都係廣東人多。The Cantonese
But it's mainly populated by Cantonese people, Hong Kong people.
So the language is the same.
Yes. 最重要都係個 language.
Yeah, the most important is the language, the shared language.
And what about, and this is a bit of a kind of shifting our conversation a little bit towards, what about, say, film cultures in those two countries? Now in Hong Kong growing up, what kind of films were you watching? What kind of films were you thinking about? And particularly perhaps films that were leading you towards thinking about films like Exiled.
我自己都唔知。
I don't really know.
Well, let's perhaps make it.
因為我好細個已經好中意睇電影。
I loved watching films since I was a child.
所以好多時啲電影影展啊，或者啲人訪問我嘅時候，你點樣諗拍電影嘅？我又冇讀過電影，我真係唔識解釋。
So when I'm attending film festivals or being interviewed and interviewers ask me why did you start to make films, I really don't know how to answer because I never studied film. I never went to school, film school.
And your first film you made in 1980. Can you tell us about how you got into filmmaking from the very beginning?
我係一個電視導演，如果有電視嘅導演，如果能夠拍一部電影呢，係其實一個好大嘅希望。
So I was a TV director before becoming a film director, but it was always a really big hope of mine to become a film director.
但係拍完第一部電影係1978年啊，其實係1978年我拍完之後呢，我就覺得自己真係唔識做導演。
So I actually made my first film in 1978, and when I completed that film, I realised that I couldn't be a film director.
咁啊，一路好多人請我拍電影，但我都冇勇氣再去拍。
And lots of people invited me to direct films, but I wasn't brave enough to take them on because I didn't feel like I could.
直至到1986年，我自己覺得可以嘗試嘅時候，差唔多係7、8年之後呢，我先覺得可以再嘗試去拍電影。
It wasn't until 1986, about 7 or 8 years afterwards, that I felt that I could take that on again and direct a film.
And so you started directing films, and looking at your career, I mean, you've clearly directed many films, as if your fans of Johnnie TO will know that it's impossible to know just how many. But on the one hand, you have quite a comic side. On the other hand, you have the films that you're famous for here, the policier, the gangster films, and also some of the wuxia kind of swordplay films as well. And where did you start in the mid-1980s, 1986? Which genre did you start working in?
喺86年之後，我去入返電影圈再拍電影嘅時候，好容易拍，感覺上即係唔同我第一部戲個感覺，完全第一個我覺得電影好難拍，到86年之後再拍翻電影嘅時候，覺得電影好容易拍。
So when I came back to making films in 1986, the film industry was different, and it was actually very easy to make a film. A completely different experience to when I first started 7 or 8 years previously.
因為嗰時嘅電影已經係全部嘅電影只可以你surface 到個票房就得嘅。
So the only requirement that you needed to make Hong Kong film was to make sure that you serviced the box office and it was commercially viable.
咁最容易做到好票房嘅，你揾出名嘅演員咪得咯，揾啲票房好嗰啲咪得咯。
Which made it very easy for us because all you had to do was get a famous star, a famous actor who had good box office results, and your film would be successful.
Because
yeah， 咁一路做到1992年，拍完一部電影之後。講個名好你得講啊！拍完咗周星馳之後呢，咁我就覺得再係咁落去，我人生就冇㗎咯喎。
So this carried on until 1992 when I finished shooting a film. Not really sure if I should say this, but a film with Stephen Chow, and after I finished that film I thought I can't do this anymore because my life will end.
由嗰時開始，我覺得我要從唔識拍電影到覺得電影好容易，跟住我會覺得自己應該要學習點成為一個導演，於是乎就成立咗銀河影像。
So after that I I basically moved from not knowing how to be a film director to finding making a film very easy, to then discovering that I actually needed to really learn how to be a real film director.
成立咗銀河影業。
我未解呢句，成立咗最 last 嗰句係成立咗
Milky Way。
Oh, okay, and that's when I founded Milky Way. Yeah.
咁成立咗之後咧，正係佢問我嘅問題就話：咁你點樣 handle 一啲 comedy 啊、一啲 commercial movie 啊，甚一啲 professional 嘅電影？因為你要維係一間公司，要建立一啲你自己想做嘅嘢，你係需要錢嘅。
So after we founded Milky Way, since you were asking about how do I balance making personal films and then the comedies and the commercial films, the fact is that when you run a company, it needs to survive, and to survive, it needs money.
咁就變成有啲嘢你係唔中意做嘅，你都要做，因為為咗你想中意做嘅嘢。
Which means that you end up in a situation where you have to do things that you don't actually want to do in order to do what you really want to do.
因為香港嗰個電影環境係你唔可能要用好多時間、好多資源俾你。一部電影嘅攝製嘅時間咧，以前咧差唔多3個月你就要上畫噶啦，即係喺嗰個制度上邊咧係好難，好似外國咁，你5年先拍部電影啊，3年先拍部電影，因為佢係好，所以好 grease 嘅，即係好急，好擠埋一齊嘅，即係擠擁嘅擠。
The thing with the Hong Kong film industry is that we don't have a lot of time and we don't have a lot of resources to make films. In the past, we used to have to be able to finish a film completely in 3 months, no more than 3 months, and it would have to be ready. We're not like the American production companies and big budgets where they can take 5 years and a big budget to complete a film. Everything is condensed and very tight.
And I think this is just good. Perhaps we'll come back to some things. I want to fast forward a little bit to the film we've already mentioned, to Election, which was in many ways the big breakthrough, definitely for many of us in Britain. It was one of the first films that we really were introduced to. And we have a clip lined up from Election, and I wonder whether we could watch that and then we'll come back to that. So it's about 2.5 minutes from Election, from a very ceremonial scene, and perhaps we'll talk about some things that this clip will bring up for us. Okay. Now, I suppose in a way what I was very interested in that scene and in that film and other films is a sense of ritual and history. And I think Election, which is so clearly about the problems of democracy in a way, and I wondered whether you want to talk about the long history of the triads and the gangsters and how you incorporated them into this very contemporary film about Hong Kong.
簡單啲。
好啊。解釋下。係，佢就想問你你黑社會啲歷史點可以做到咁先進部戲？
其實喺香港嘅情況就比較特別嘅，因為97之後嗰個政治上嘅問題都好多。
So Hong Kong is in a particular situation, especially after 1997, there were a lot of political problems.
咁就喺好多人都會覺得需要一個普選，你知唔知普選 election？
So a lot of people thought we needed to have an election in Hong Kong.
咁實質上喺呢一個問題上邊係令到香港好多爭拗。
So this caused a lot of fighting in Hong Kong, a lot of arguing.
咁就喺呢個戲裏邊，其實我想講嘅嘢就係話喺成個香港嘅97年之後，香港嘅變化除咗喺政治上嘅變化之外，喺教育金融或者係嗰啲生活上都係有一定嘅影響。
So I guess what I wanted to say with making this film was that before 1997, apart from political unrest, a lot of things changed, like our economy, the society, the discipline.
嗰個問題嗰時我開始嘅時候嘅睇法係睇緊嗰個轉變裏邊咧，最大嗰樣嘢係黑社會咧呢一個歷史喺成個香港嘅轉變裏邊咧，日後就唔會有人記得嘅。
And amongst all these changes, the biggest change that I started to look at was the change within the triads, and I realised that the history of the triads would be forgotten.
因為黑社會好似同香港，尤其是大家睇好多黑幫片啊、香港嘅英雄片裏邊啊，黑社會好似係一個幾屬於香港嘅一部分嚟嘅。
So a lot of, I think that for the triads in Hong Kong, they very much belong to Hong Kong. So we all see lots of heroic films or gangster films, but the triad genre very much belongs to Hong Kong.
其實用佢哋去講一啲故事，係我覺得應該係喺我睇香港長大裏邊，我覺得有啲人哋唔講我講。即係歷史同埋書同埋任何嘢唔會記載黑社會佢哋呢一段呢一個時期所發生嘅事。
So the stories that I knew growing up in Hong Kong, I realised they wouldn't be recorded in the history books, and nobody would really remember the triad's history or talk about it afterwards.
And I mean, what is so clear in films like Election and others is that the history of the triads is not only goes back hundreds of years as well, but is also, as you say, part of contemporary history. And have you seen in your working career the triads change in their relationship to Hong Kong, but also the way in which the triads appear in films, both in your films and others? Has there been a change in the last?
A big change. 其實黑社會第一、第二集就係講咗，即係佢哋嘅一啲喺佢哋自己世界裏邊，黑社會嘅世界裏邊嘅鬥爭嘅只係，但係真正嚟講，成個故事裏邊會睇到就係。呢個咧就唔喺第一、二集裏邊嘅，但喺第三即係後邊咧，其實要講嘅嘢咧就係不過而家未拍，不過大概會係當時我想法大概會係97年好長嘅，你解釋咗呢件事。
好啊，我解釋呢個先。It's quite a long answer, so we could break it in parts. Yes, there's a big change. In Election 1 and 2, I talked very much about their worlds and the world of the triads, and there's a lot of fighting in between those worlds, between each other in that world. But really what you don't see, and it's something that I was thinking about to make, I just haven't made it yet, but there's another part which I'd like to talk about.
即係大家會睇到97之後、97之前。黑社會喺香港嘅活動越嚟越少。
So the difference between before 97 and after 97 is that the triad activity became less and less.
你講 before 即係話係97前嗰幾年喎，唔係講到6幾年。
Just a few years before 97, not in the 60s or 70s, but the few years leading up to 97.
到今日差唔多2000年、2015年，幾乎香港黑社會大部分都唔見咗。
So from then up to now, so the mid 2015, the majority of Hong Kong's triads have gone.
Almost
gone.
But it's
點解會咁？
And I wondered why have they almost all gone?
點解英國人管治香港100幾年都搞唔到啲黑社會？
How come after over 100 years of UK rule, they were unable to eradicate the triads?
and
呢個係我自己覺得點解咧？我都問點解。
And I wondered why? How come they didn't get rid of them?
And I mean, and I was thinking, well, I wonder why. I was thinking that there's later films like Life Without Principle, which really look at contemporary capitalism, the banks, but money. Money is, who's exploiting who, and that's in a way. Perhaps it starts the election, perhaps before that in a way, the gangsters, the triads, and the banks and the money systems are the same. And is this part of why, in a way, the triads have become or are the system? Is that what you might?
嗰個黑社會同咩？
黑社會同埋啲銀行係咪其實係一樣咯？
Same 有可能就係話銀行嗰啲仲衰過黑社會。
Maybe the bankers are worse than the triads.
佢咗你件 jacket 之後，又見到你有恤衫，就埋你件恤衫，攞埋恤衫有底衫，底衫都埋，底你仲有褲喎，褲都要攞埋。
So the banks will cheat you out of your jacket, and then they see you're wearing a shirt under that, so they'll cheat you out of that. Under the shirt, you see you're wearing a vest, so they'll take that as well. But you've still got your underpants on, and they'll cheat you out of that as well.
喺我哋認識銀行係最安全嘅，我哋細個覺得擺錢喺銀行最安全。
So when I was little, we always thought of banks as being a security. Putting your money in a bank was the best and safest thing to do.
但係而家你會覺得銀行嗰啲人咧係個劫匪嚟嘅。
And now you realise that banks are actually robbers.
只有佢先知你有幾多錢喺銀行。
They're the only people who know exactly how much money you've got in the bank.
只有佢先知點樣打劫你。
They're the only people that really know how to take that money from you.
And so, who are the honest people left? And perhaps, and perhaps I'm thinking a little bit about the romances you've made, that there is something about everyday love, everyday family, that is perhaps outside of those big money systems, or whether, I mean, is that pushing it a bit too far?
係咪呢啲浪漫嗰啲片或者喜劇係講返無辜啲人，係我哋係呢啲角色係唔關黑社會同埋唔關銀行事？
因為大家生活都需要一啲調劑嘅。
調劑。
即係點講？即係你需要用一啲嘢去沖淡你自己嘅壓力嘅。
Okay. So I think everybody needs in everyday life something to get rid of the pressures that we're all under every day, a bit of escapism.
咁 comedy 咧係一個最好嘅方法。
And comedy is one of the best escapisms.
而且拍 comedy 嗰個當然係好難度嘅啲橋 ，creative 係好難。但係拍 comedy 咧 你會自己都會輕鬆啲。
So comedies, romantic comedies, are more difficult to make because you have to think of the gags and the jokes. But making them also makes you happier, and it's also an escape for me.
同埋拍 comedy 嘅電影嘅 budget 唔會大嘅。
The budget is always very low on comedy films.
所以通常啲老闆都會賺錢嘅。
So which means the bosses earn a lot of money and they make a profit.
So 於是變成咧就好容易就平衡到一啲好壓力嘅片又唔收錢啦，去支持到嗰個我哋製造電影嗰個可能性嘅。
And because of that, it's easy to balance making a more personal film, which perhaps doesn't do well in the box office, with an easy-to-make romantic comedy, which does bring in the money in the box office and the commercial success, and there's the good balance there between the two.
I wanted to ask about perhaps coming back to your starting Milky Way Images in 1996 with EIFF. And EIFF is someone you've directed with, that you've produced with, and I wonder if you want to talk about or tell us a little bit about your relationship with EIFF and your filmmaking.
我成立銀河影像都係以韋家輝先生嗰個精神嘅。韋家輝先生嘅當時我哋成立嘅時候，我哋入去喺個電影嗰個圈子裏邊咧。我哋成立嘅時候講咗就係我哋要原創嘅所有嘢，即係 original idea。
So the founding of Milky Way is very much thanks to EIFF's contribution. When we decided to make the company, our main purpose was that we wanted to create original products within the film industry. Everything had to be original from us.
喺創作嘅過程啊，一切嘅嘢咧，都係沿用韋家輝嗰個概念嘅。
So everything that we made with Milky Way was adhering to EIFF's principle of making everything original.
我哋兩個合作拍電影嘅時候咧，就大部分嘅電影都會係佢喺度創作嘅時候，就我喺度拍緊嘅。
So the way we collaborate usually when we work together is he would be writing and thinking about the stories while I am shooting and actually making the film.
因為我哋拍出每部戲都係大部分都係冇劇本。
Because the majority of our films are made without any script.
所以佢一寫完我就即刻喺現場就拍。
So as soon as he's finished writing, I would be on set already shooting.
所以我哋兩個拍緊戲嘅時候根本冇見過面嘅。
So when we make a film together, we never see each other.
Until 拍完咗之後。
Until we finished the film.
And so this kind of cues us to the next clip, which is from the film that you directed with EIFF, Mad Detective, which again I think was one film that many of us would have seen. And that film, when I first saw it, the way in which we were inside the detective's mind, and that we couldn't tell what was real and what was not. And in the scene that we have queued up, the detective, played by Ching-Wen Lau, is able to see the personalities inside the killer's mind as real people. And I thought perhaps we could watch that clip and then perhaps see. Now, I think that scene really shows us a certain style of filmmaking, that long shot, that very flattened side, but being able to see inside the mind and not being quite sure what we're looking at. Was that a difficult scene to shoot? How did you shoot that?
韋家輝講完之後，我都唔明㗎。
When EIFF first explained the scene to me, I didn't really understand.
我就一路拍一路明嘅。
I
拍緊都唔係好明，拍下先明。
I understood it as I was shooting it, so I still didn't really know what I was doing, and then eventually understood.
And so one of the things with watching Mad Detective, I wasn't sure whether we were in a magic world where where some people could see into people's minds, or whether we were in some other, it was just a way of explaining what was going on. Is the detective able to see something magical in other people? Because towards the end, when more and more people become involved in his mind,
其實我自己睇就係話，根本上我而家睇有啲人，我都睇到起碼有2、3個唔同嘅 face。
Even when I look at people today, I think you can see that some of them have 2 or 3 different faces.
不過有啲人就再多啲，有7個、8個或者10個，你睇唔到嘅。
But then there are other people who have even more, and you just don't see them. They could have 7, 8, 9, 10, and you just don't see them.
簡單啲就係作為你教書嘅個學生入嚟同你講理由，大家鬧完交，兩個都走咗之後，你估大家諗緊佢嘅係咩嘢？佢諗緊你係咩嘢？
So, as a simple example, as a professor and as a teacher, say one of your students comes to talk to you and you have a discussion and you're arguing with each other. You finish the discussion and you both go your separate ways. What do you think you're thinking about each other as you walk away?
你一定諗緊佢後邊個腦，佢究竟想緊乜嘢？佢又諗緊，你喺度諗緊啲嘢。佢唔會諗翻你個樣喎，會唔會諗話你個樣係咁，佢個樣係咁？佢諗緊佢諗緊乜嘢？
You'll most likely be thinking, I wonder what they're thinking about me right now after everything we've said. You will very rarely be thinking about their face or what they look like and their image. It'll be more, what are they thinking about me?
我哋就拍嗰陣同埋諗呢個故事嘅時候，都話用嗰樣嘢，用呢個名詞去形容我哋嘅 character， 有咁多嘅 character， 我哋係用個有幾多隻鬼嘅，其實係 how many ghosts？
Yeah, and when we were thinking about making the film and when we were making it, we just thought it was the right symbol to show this would be to say how many ghosts or how many spirits do you have.
唔係幾多個 character 喎。
Not how many characters, how many spirits.
And I mean, throughout your films, people are often hiding, pretending to be somebody else, pretending. I'm thinking about Drug Wars, where somebody is working, double agents, triple agents, undercover, not undercover, and that kind of concealing seems to really work cinematically, where you can't tell what. The question is, who is this person I'm looking at? Is that an issue that you think about a lot in your films? What is the true person?
因為嗰部戲本來唔係咁。
This film wasn't meant to be like that, really.
因為我哋去天津喺中國大陸天津拍，係希望係因為我哋係南方人，從來冇落雪嘅。我哋希望拍一部戲係南方同埋北方嘅。
So, being from the south, it never snows where we are. And we shot the film. We went to Tianjin in China to shoot the film. And what I wanted to show was the difference between the north and the south.
咁就去到天津拍咗個幾兩個月，一滴雪都冇落過。
And after 2.5 months of shooting in Tianjin, not even a single drop of snow fell.
但係拍攝非常慢，因為係好凍。
But shooting went very slowly because it was extremely cold.
咁原來本來個故事係由天津拍完就去湖南，湖南拍完就去湖南，然之後去 廣州，廣州拍完就去雲南咁嘅，咁但係拍到天津都幾乎拍唔晒啲錢。
So originally the film was meant to be shot in Tianjin, and then we were going to go to Wunan, and then to Guangzhou, and then to Lam. But then in the end, Yunnan. And then in the end, by the time we would finished in Tianjin, we'd almost run out of the budget.
所以個古仔就一路喺度轉變緊。
So the story changed because of that as we went along.
所以我答唔到你淨係問嘅問題。
So I can't really answer that question properly.
But working in this kind of free way, I mean, over your many of your films, you use many of the same actors. You see the same actors coming up, you know, Simon Yam, Lam Suet, you know, all of. So, and you keep this group of actors with you. How does that work for you? Do you like working with? Well, obviously, you like working with the same people. How do you work with them, and how do they contribute to your film?
咁成日揾嚟揾去都係嗰啲人，因為我懶啫。
It's because I'm lazy.
因為我唔中意同人哋溝通咁耐。
So I don't really like to spend too much time communicating and getting to know someone.
作為一個演員，佢應該係可以可以做好多唔同嘅角色嘅，我認為。
So as an actor, they should be able to play many different characters.
除非佢唔中意。
Unless they don't like playing a certain character.
咁我自己會因為我拍戲成日都冇劇本。
And because we don't ever have a script when we start shooting.
好多人未必接受得到。
A lot of actors wouldn't accept that.
咁所以用一啲接受我嘅人去拍我嘅。
So I keep using the same actors who accept that fact of how I work.
And yeah, it is always extraordinary to see the same faces doing something else very different, but also very familiar in your films. And I think it's one of the great joys of watching your films. Clearly, there are themes and ideas about honor, brotherhood, loyalty that come up over and over again. But I wonder, looking at our time, I'm sure the audience may want to come in, and I think we won't have a roving mic, so I might repeat your question just to make sure that everybody's heard it. And so if there's any questions from the floor, perhaps we can move on to that and we can...
Yeah.
Over here.
I wanted to ask about the visuals of your films and sound, music, cutting, movement of actors, movement of the camera. At what stage do you begin to think about this?
So the question is, at what stage do you start thinking about the visual style of your film, editing, and the way that sound is going to work?
冇準備喎，嗰都冇劇本。
I don't prepare any of it as I don't have a script, so none of that is prepared.
我係諗好多，成日都諗好多嘢。
I do think a lot all the time and I have lots of different ideas.
但係唔去到現場咧，即係唔喺個 location on set，我係唔會決定嘅。
But I don't actually decide on anything until I'm actually on location on set.
所以只有去到shoot 嘅時候咧，嗰個先係真嘅。
So all of the ideas, the only real one happens or comes to life when I'm on set.
所以你問我有幾多準備，我有好多準備，其實冇準備。
So I could say in both terms. I have a lot of preparation, but also absolutely no preparation whatsoever.
但係我覺得音樂部分咧，好多時我唔係好識音樂嘅。
However, in terms of music, I don't know music very well.
但係我自己會揾一啲我覺得啱呢部戲嘅音樂俾嗰個 composer 聽嘅。
But I will research myself what type of music I think is appropriate for this film and tell the composer.
Over here.
Yeah, the first question is a simple one. I just wonder, in election you have a dragging head stick. Is that a history fact or just something you make it up? And the second one is about the ending of the film. We know that most of the film, like from election, Life or Without Principles, or Life Without Principles, we have a different ending in the Chinese mainland of China version. So I'm just curious how it works. So if the censorship commitment just tell you should have such an ending, or you chose that one and show them, say whether they are satisfied, how it works.
Okay, so the first question is the totem or the stick in election, whether that is a historical fact. If you know the film, the triads passed on the stick to the next leader, and whether that is historical fact.
嗰個黑社會嘅龍頭棍咧，唔係個個幫派都有嘅。我講嗰個係真係有嘅。
Okay, so within the triads, not every single tribe has the dragon head stick, but the tribe I was talking about did. It's actual historic fact.
但係我都未見過係點。
But I've never seen what it looks like.
電影嗰個都係假嘅。
The one in the film was just an invention, it's fake.
因為冇人見過。
No one's seen it.
只有當時嗰個大佬啊，即係嗰個 leader 先至有。
Only the big boss, the big leader of the tribe would have it.
但係可能攞出嚟好醜樣。
It's probably very ugly if you really saw it.
And then the second.
第二個問題就係話，我自己只有一個 version 嘅，只有一個版。之後啲人點樣要賣埠啊？要去邊度做出嚟嗰啲版咧？我一啲都唔知嘅。
So I only ever have one version in my head. It's my version of the film. After that, if things have to be done in terms of censorship or box office reasons or whatever the reasons are, I don't want to know about it and I don't know anything about it.
我試過喺大陸睇我自己嘅戲，我都唔知部戲講乜。
I've been to China. I watched one of my own films in China and didn't know what on earth the film was about. I thought, what is this? It wasn't my film.
Yes, over there. Yeah, a general question about film culture in Hong Kong. There's a bit of a longer question than that, but to what extent is cinema still part of your thinking?
同埋佢覺得香港人覺得好多香港電影、香港戲院越嚟越少執笠，你有咩感受？
香港戲院都冇執好多，都有好多戲院，不過少咗香港片啫。
So Hong Kong cinemas are still surviving, but Hong Kong films are definitely in the declining.
我會覺得就係話雨傘運動係一個時代好重要。點解會有雨傘運動先？點解會咁先？好地地，即係無端端整啲嘢出嚟咩？真係，即係我覺得呢個係個時代裏邊係必然出現嘅，而個氣候會變成點，個雨傘又會變成點。你問我會唔會感動？我會感動，我一定感動。
聽唔到，我都聽唔到。等我翻譯先啦。Okay. So the Umbrella Revolution, which happened in Hong Kong last year, I think was a very, very important historical moment. And we have to ask ourselves, why did that happen? Where did that come from? Out of the blue, this happened. But I do think it was an inevitable event. And what the conclusion is, we still don't really know what will happen after the Umbrella Revolution. 跟住有問。
你想補充咩？
最主要係想問下你做電影嘅時候，你即係咗而家黑幫嘅文化係少咗，咁你會唔會做啲 relate 有關係嘅戲 ？So I'm just asking if he's going to, because about the umbrella movement, I'm just asking if he's interested to do anything related to that or.
Yeah, if there's anything going to be about the umbrella revolution in your coming films.
第3集都未拍。
So I haven't made election
一
3
定未
yet.
完。
So it hasn't ended yet.
一定會拍。
And I definitely will make
一定
something
會
about
知
that. I really want to make a point about that.
Right. Yes.
I was just, this is a question actually on behalf of my brother, who is a huge fan of Mr. To. And in the trailer to Election 2, there was some footage relating to an execution of a character by the People's Liberation Army, which didn't appear in the film. And the question was whether that was a political decision or whether it was the Chinese censors or whether that's just reading too much into it.
黑社會第2集個 trailer 係有睇到有個人俾係咪大陸斬頭或者槍斃？咁點解個戲入邊係冇嘅？但係個 trailer 都有睇到嘅。佢話係咪因為大陸啲 censor 唔俾你用？
冇㗎。
我都唔知有冇。
你有睇到？冇。
He's not really.
係咪佢撈亂咗第啲
？Are you sure it's the trailer for Election 2?
Yes, 2006, apparently.
Really?
I have no idea.
No memory of that.
We'll have to bring your brother.
No idea.
Yeah.
我的问题是，我先拿中文说一遍。我们知道，就是您在 TVB 工作了很长时间，然后随后才自己出来开公司做。我想问一下，您觉得在 TVB 所学到的最重要的东西是什么？比如说认识的重要的人，还是说技能，还是经验 ？And my question is, we know that you have been in TVB for years, and what is the most important thing you think you learned from there? Say some important, powerful guy, or the skills, or the experience in this field.
Okay.
好 simple 答到你嘅。學識點樣去捱啊
I learned how to survive.
And this is a question about TVB, the television station that television production unit that Mr. To started working with.
我一生人瞓得最少嘅咧，喺電視台嘅日子。
The time in my life where I've had the least numbers of hours of sleep is when I worked for TVB.
我拍陸小鳳啊，差唔多1976年嘅時候，我試過7日冇瞓覺。
So when I was making Luk Siu Fung, which was 1976, I went for 7 days without sleeping.
喺84、85年咧，84咁上下啦，我係1個月瞓咗20個鐘頭。
So in 1984, near 1985, there was 1 month where I'd slept in total 20 hours.
佢哋以前電視台成日都打仗噶嘛。
Because the TV channels used to be at war with each other all the time.
但次次都揾我嚟搞。
And every time they would call me out to sort it out.
你問我電視裏邊得到咩，咪得到捱得咯。
So what did I learn from TV work? How to survive.
然后还有一个问题是，我们知道您拍电影的时候是不需要剧本的。
不需要，沒有啊。
I don't know that you got me.
問我拍嘅時候咪唔需要劇本嘅，我話唔係冇，唔需要係冇啊。
Oh, she asked about not having a script or not needing to work with a script making a film, and Mr. To answered, "It's not that I don't need a script, I just don't have one."
我是想问，因为您还有一个很大的影视公司，那您在运营这个影视公司的时候，您其实是在招聘编剧的。那
招什麼？聽唔懂。
招聘編劇 recruiting。
交片。
recruiting。
請編劇。
你有冇請編劇？佢問你有冇喺公司裏面你有間製作公司，你有冇請編劇
Or do you employ script writers?
Yeah.
Okay. Question finished? Too long.
But you do
Cut.
need screenwriters, and what's the standard of your recruiting screenwriters? Because
Yeah.
one of my friends wants to go to your company and reviews. So it's your general question. What's your standard recruiting one?
我哋公司係養咗好多編劇，但係個個都唔得嘅。
Our company has employed a lot of screenwriters, scriptwriters, but none of them are good enough.
呢差唔多7-8年嚟，大學出嚟嘅喺我哋學校喺我哋公司長期都至少有2-3個係做 trainee 嘅。
So in the last 7 or 8 years, we've had a lot of graduates from university have come and worked at our company, and we've always had about 2 to 3 working there.
但係佢哋一入咗嚟之後咧，就越嚟越驚。
But after they enter the company, they become more and more scared.
因為佢哋話：我哋讀嗰4年書係冇用。
Because they realise that the 4 years they've just spent at university were useless.
因為講乜你哋都覺得錯嘅。
Because whatever I tell them to do, they find it to be wrong or controversial.
咁
Okay.
夠啦嗬，答晒你嘅。
So a question about whether international international directors have influenced.
唔影響啊
influence.
Kurosawa。
Kurosawa is a massive influence. The biggest.
Yeah, in fact, we were talking about, and now I've completely blanked which, but actually coming to PTU, which we'll come back to in a bit, where it's almost a reference to Stray Dog with the Lost Gun, Kurosawa's film, and you know some of your films are explicit homages. I think Throwdown, which you often talk about as one of your, is dedicated to Kurosawa as well. And what about perhaps building on that contemporary cinema? Are there any filmmakers you see working now, either in Hong Kong or in the world, that you particularly like or recommend?
今時今日啲導演咧，係咯，即係你想同佢哋合作，唔單止喺香港，但係國際嘅導演，你都導演filmmaker。
冇啊，只有韋家輝。
No, just Wai Ka-fai. I'm not interested.
Great, down here.
I was wondering, when you see triads in foreign films, it tends to be all about like flashy cars and clothes, whereas in Hong Kong films it's more about honor and brotherhoods, and they're not as dressed as well. I was just wondering why you think there's that disparity between international portrayals of triads and when it's done by Hong Kong directors.
Okay, so that in Hong Kong films, the triads are presented really through questions of brotherhood and loyalty, whereas perhaps outsiders looking in presented in terms of flash and cars and money and all the rest of it. Although
點解會呢個分別？
唔係嘅，係一樣。
It's actually the same.
不過佢哋着衫嘅 taste 唔同。
Just that their clothing tastes are different.
都係中意着靚衫。
They do wear expensive clothes.
佢哋揾咗錢唔識用。
It's just that they've made a lot of money, but they just don't know how to spend it.
佢就算靚車佢都唔識揸嘅。
Even a beautiful car, flashy car, they don't know how to really go and buy one or drive it.
嗰個追求都係一樣嘅。
The aim is the same.
Same.
And actually, just following up on that, would you say that in Hong Kong today, the triads are part of everyday life, or that normal people would be aware or work with triad members or within the triad system in some way? Or
因為黑社會影香港，我就係講咗一個過程俾你聽。其實因為佢好耐日子，佢已經係好似有時候大家 驚佢就驚佢啲就唔行，即係你喺嗰條街，我咪行隔離街咯。即係 get used 已經習慣咗。
So the very fact that the triads have existed for so long means that the Hong Kong society has now become used to the way they are and how they are. For example, if you see a triad member walking down the street to you, you just cross the street and you do it automatically and it's a part of your everyday life.
嗰個生存裏邊咧，當黑社會好犀利喺香港嘅時候咧，個生存裏邊嘅伎倆咧，大家慢慢會學習到。
So when the triads were very powerful and very strong, everybody around them in Hong Kong society and the population will learn how to adapt and live with them.
黑社會大部分嘅人咧，佢哋欺負嘅都係一啲冇能力嘅人，或者係喺一啲窮嘅地方去揾食，佢哋唔敢去挑戰住喺最貴地方嘅人，佢唔會去跑去山頂。走去搞你，佢唔夠膽。
So the triads usually bully the most vulnerable. So the people who are the poorest and have no defences, they don't have the courage to go and challenge the richest and the most powerful people. They won't run up to the peaks of Hong Kong and challenge the people living in the big houses there. They're not brave enough.
Silly question. I was very interested to hear you talk about sleep deprivation that you suffered making television. Sleep deprivation can cause very strange psychological states, including hallucinations. Did anything like that happen to you, and has it informed your work?
To what extent has sleep deprivation and hallucinations resulting therefrom influenced your work?
你有冇試過啊？
有啊。
同埋有冇影響你到去拍戲啊？ Yes, he did have hallucinations and psychological problems.
但係有時原來人嘅壓力越大咧，你就忘記咗瞓覺。
But it turns out that sometimes the more pressure you're under, you simply forget to sleep.
因為根本個時間係唔夠去做一件事，你不停去追緊個時間嘅時候咧，你係可以唔瞓嘅。
Because when you're doing something and you simply don't have enough time to do it, you're constantly chasing and trying to catch up, and you can't even think about sleeping.
但係如果譬如有1-2個鐘頭，你一唔做咧，佢好快就成個冧晒嘅。
But if you happen to have 1-2 hours where you're stopping, you don't have anything to do and you're not working, then your entire body shuts down and collapses.
有時我翻到屋企，我老婆就指我準我沖涼，沖完涼之後就攞埋我啲嘢就掉咗我上車，因為驚我一瞓落張床咧，我就起唔到身。
So very often I would go home, and as soon as I got home, my wife would tell me to take a bath, and then as soon as I had the bath, she would throw me into the car with all of my things because she was really worried that if I actually lay down on the bed, I wouldn't get up again.
Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your earlier martial arts films like David Sorfa, Barefoot Kid. I was wondering if you enjoyed making those films and want to make more martial arts films in the future.
Whether martial arts films, which of course the Heroic Trio with Maggie Chung and the Barefoot Kid, whether you're going to come back to this genre.
而家嘅武俠片我一定會拍。
Definitely would like to make more.
但係而家嘅武俠片比以前容易，因為太多 CG。
They're a lot easier to make now because there's so much CGI involved.
所以而家嘅武俠片應該好睇過以前嘅。
So there should be a lot more. They should be a lot better than the olden day wuxia films.
因為以前人做到先得㗎嘛，而家唔使人做都得，連做都得。
Because in the past you could only make something that an actual human being could do, but now you don't have to worry about that limitation.
Spider-Man and the Batman.
And actually, have you found the change from working with analog film, with celluloid to digital, have you found that easy or problematic?
More easy. 容易咗好多，但係唔好睇。
It's a lot easier, but I
我係中意 analog。
don't think it looks as good. I prefer looking at analog.
Sorry, there's a question here.
You did interview policeman in Chongqing in 2009, so I just wonder what inspiration you got from these interviews, comparing the film and the real police.
Yes, a question about interviews that Mr. To did with real policemen and to what extent those interviews influenced his work.
佢話你同啲警察真係有訪問過 interview 咁。
但係啲警察咧，通常咧都唔講真嘅俾你聽。
The police will very rarely tell you the truth.
我哋次次都係同黑社會問翻啲差佬係點嘅。
I would always go to the
黑社會
triads
講真話
to ask
差
them
人係講假嘅。
what the police were like and what the police really did, and the triads tell the truth, the police don't.
你問差人有冇打啲犯咧，佢就唔得嘅，我哋唔得打人嘅，法例唔俾我哋打人嘅。咁你問個嗰個俾佢啲 gangster， 佢話入去就打，打到你講為止。你信邊個啊？
So when we ask the police officers, do you hit the criminals? Are you allowed to hit them? And they would answer, no, it's not. We're not allowed to. It's illegal. We can't hit criminals. But then you go and ask the boy they've just beaten up, and the gangster members, and they say, and I say, do the cops beat you up? And they say, as soon as we get to the police station, they beat you up. They beat you up until you speak. So who do you believe?
Right over here.
队长，我想问，就是之前看过您的很多电影，知道您最喜欢的导演是法国的让梅尔维尔，然后我知道你有部片子在文缺的时候，就是还有很多片子都在向这个大师致敬，所以说我想知道这个导演他对你的影响到底是什么？从这个导演身上学习到了什么东西？
He's asking that you really like Jean-Pierre Melville, and he was talking about watching Sparrow, and he would like to know the influence that Wen Xue Sparrow has caused on you, in terms of in relation to Jean-Pierre Melville.
And yeah, question about the influence of Jean-Pierre Melville, the 1950s and 60s French director of the Policier, and obviously a great influence of many of the
我嗰個答咗你先，我最中意嘅導演都係佢有份，但係最中意都係黑澤。
So Melville is definitely amongst my favourite directors, but the most favourite is definitely Kurosawa.
拍 Sparrow 嗰個戲，其實我好中意抽水伊人嘅，抽水伊人叫Umbrella。 啊，我係中意
Jacques Demy，
我係中意嗰個戲嚟拍呢一部戲。
Oh, it's influenced by
法國片嚟嘅，係叫做抽水伊人。
So Sparrow was influenced by the Jacques Demy film, Umbrella of Chevaux.
Fantastic film.
Yes.
Fantastic film. In the back there. Yes, you.
I've got two questions. The first one is quite general, the second one's very specific. The first one is, does Mr. To read European and North American critics who regularly describe him as one of the world's great directors? What does he think when he reads those reviews?
你有冇多唔多時會讀歐洲同埋美國嗰啲記者係影評寫，因為佢哋好多時都話你係世界為最好嘅導演。
我都唔識英文嘅。
I don't know English, so I don't read it.
人哋講俾我聽，我咪知咯。
If someone reads it and tells me, then I'll know, but otherwise not.
其實我自己都覺得好幸運嘅，即係能夠喺香港個咁嘅地方拍咗咁多電影，亦都今日嚟到呢個英國呢個蘇格蘭嚟到呢個愛丁堡第一次咁亦都咁多人坐咗咁耐都唔走，咁我覺得我都不枉此生拍喺香港呢個咁嘅小島拍咗咁多電影出嚟嘅話咧，咁都唔使睇嗰啲啦睇 喺呢度喐得啦。
So I feel very, very lucky already that I can make so many films from such a place as Hong Kong, such a small little island like Hong Kong, and get to travel the world and come to lots of different places and see lots of different film festivals, and come to Edinburgh, Scotland for the very first time, and come to a room like this and see so many people sitting here and you haven't left. So I don't need to see the critics and the reviews, I just need to look at you.
And you had a specific question.
The second question was about horse racing in Hong Kong, which is a big source of money and Hong Kong jockey club. Have you ever made a film which is about the world of horse racing in Hong Kong? And if not, would you do that?
The world of horse racing in Hong Kong.
好大嘅好大成功，咁你有冇諗過用賭馬呢個 subject 去做戲咧？
如果我唔拍戲，我都成日去馬場㗎。
If I wasn't a filmmaker, I would always be at the horse jockey club, betting on horses.
我覺得最難嘅地方就係我哋冇辦法拍到啲馬。
I think the biggest difficulty would be actually shooting the horses.
Yeah. 同埋嗰個場地咧係冇辦法做得到。
And the grounds, it would be difficult to actually make the grounds.
我覺得馬場亦都係一個好神奇嘅地方。
I do find it a very mystical place, the horse ground.
乜嘢人都有。
All people from all walks of life are there.
佢同股票市場一模一樣。
It's just like everyday society outside of that.
但係真正嚟講，我自己中意跑馬咧，就係因為我中意個運動。係真係去比賽嘅時候咧，嗰啲馬同人嗰個合一嘅時候，嗰種力啊，同埋嗰種控制啊，同埋個圈成個 speed 個控制係要好有 talent 同埋好有即係騎功啊，即係個能力先得。
So what I really like about horse racing is the actual the combination and the coming together of the jockey and the horse, and the movement and the strength and the teamwork that it takes to maneuver themselves around the race course, and I find that very beautiful.
好特別就係佢哋個聲。
Especially the sounds, the hooves on the ground, the sounds of the race course.
同埋佢哋一撞咁埋嘅時候咧，嗰啲唔係咁簡單嘅事，會死人嘅。
And the tension when horses get very close together, it's not a simple matter. People could die.
And of course, perhaps to tie this all together, tension, a group working together, sound. We're going to move into a final clip to end our discussion here, which is from 2003's PTU, Police Tactical Unit. And clearly, one of the things that we all know Johnnie TO's films for are the spectacular shootout scenes. So we thought we'd end with the very famous final shootout from PTU. So thank you very much to Johnnie TO.